met a lot of people here who don't realize I'm still on the air. That was part of the plan, I guess. But I'm still on the air. You can find me at thedavidknightshow.com. And you can find links to where we are. You won't find me if you search for me on YouTube because I've been kicked off for the 7th time. I've been banned now this last 2 weeks from Venmo, from PayPal. So, but there's places where you can find, if you want to support the broadcast, but most importantly, where you can find us, the podcast, and where you can find the videos. We have links to the different places where we are on video platforms. There's still some free speech platforms out there, but there's not a lot of critical mass. Everybody still goes to YouTube. Everybody still goes to the easy spot. And when I go there to see what they're pushing, the main reason I go to YouTube anymore is because I want to see the propaganda that they're pushing. Every time I go there, they will recommend videos that have influencers that they're paying because they've got a lot of money to pay these influencers. And they'll have influencers telling you with interviews of Fauci how safe all of this is and everything that they want to tell you. So I look at that to see what the mainstream media is pushing. They kind of curate that for me so it reduces the amount of time I have to spend looking at mainstream media. I can just go to YouTube and I can get the propaganda and then I can dissect it from there. But yeah, everybody still goes to YouTube, but there's a lot of other places out there, and that's the key. We need to start building up our own decentralized, autonomous, local connections.
That's true.
You have to understand that in every country, the politicians and the political parties have not mattered whatsoever. You can look at places where you got radical left-wing politicians, or you can look at places where you have conservative politicians, like Alberta, Canada. The most conservative Canadian province. It's a lot more conservative than many American states, certainly more conservative than New York, but they're locking up pastors left and right now. And you look at what is happening in Australia, look at what happened in Victoria, particularly in Melbourne. Last summer, which was their winter, you were seeing the kinds of thuggish behavior from mobs of cops on people, watching people as they're being pinned from behind, and then having other cops put a mask on their face, while even more cops are standing around in full riot gear, others mounted on horses. What is happening? These are countries that have grown out of the long-standing tradition, going back to the Magna Carta and all these other traditions that we established. People died for these. And this country was established to maintain those structures. This is all being taken away. This is not cancel culture. This is not a culture war.
No.
That really minimizes this. It is a spiritual war, and it is a Marxist purge.
Yes.
That's the tactic, and that is the ultimate goal is a spiritual war, and you can see it in the fact that they're coming after these churches now. When you look at the flags that were being flown this May 1st, May Day, it's when the socialists and the communists like to go out, and we had some in Austin. They were flying the communist flag, hammer and sickle. And let me tell you, when I look at the hammer and sickle, I know how they hammered people in the Soviet Union. And with the sickle, it's like the sickle of the Grim Reaper. They harvested hundreds of millions of lives, that authoritarian state. But you know, you had people there like Solzhenitsyn, and they hammered him, and they put him in the gulag, and they hammered him there, and they continued to hammer him, but he and other people like him wrote their samizdat, and they continued to resist. They understood that what they were after was not just controlling every aspect of their life, which is what the communists do, and they're doing it now, is controlling every aspect of people's lives. We will not be slaves to authoritarian communists. We will not be your slaves. We will not be reduced to the lowest common denominator. We will not be fed by their hands. And that's what they want to do to you. That's what UBI is. Universal Basic Income is nothing other than a plan to force feed you into slavery. It's the way you control and train your dog. And that's what they're doing to us now. You look at the hammer and sickle. And they continued to hammer these people. But Goethe said, you are either hammer or anvil. Which one will you be? Will you be the hammer, the tool of the authoritarians to try to beat your neighbors into submission? Because they hammered Solzhenitsyn and these other people, they hammered them again and again, and eventually the anvils, like Solzhenitsyn, broke the hammer. And they're going to continue to hammer us, and we're going to continue to take the blows until we beat that. There's one way that we're going to beat this. And we have to fight back, but we have to not fight back in the way they want us to fight back. Their weapon is violence. Their weapon is the bully club, right? Their weapon is a SWAT team. The militarized the police. We have to not fight their war. If you look at what we have typically done since World War II, we fought a lot of asymmetric wars. We can come in and we can eviscerate an entire area with our superior military technology, but we cannot dominate them. You got to put boots on the ground. And then what happens is these people that you have completely dominated, and the same thing happened with the Blitzkrieg. The military superiority that people have, that the Nazis had, did not help them to eventually win the war. The war was not going our way at the beginning of World War II. The war was not going the way that Washington and others wanted it at the beginning of the Texas Revolution. Look at the Alamo, look at Goliad. It didn't go their way. The aggressors usually have the advantage at the beginning of a war. This last year has not been to our advantage. This last year we've had a lot of casualties in this war. Look at how many businesses have died. Do you know how many businesses have been murdered? And how many jobs, how many dreams and lives, the sweat and the blood and the tears that people put into their businesses that has been taken away this last year. They didn't even bother to count that anymore. The count was up over 100,000. I don't know who came up with that number, because it's pretty hard to tell. Most of these small businesses that have been eviscerated, most of them are just walking away because if they don't have something where they have to go through bankruptcy court, a lot of them just abandon their business and walk away. So we don't know how many have closed, but they're not really concerned about that. That's not their concern. They don't care. So it's been a very bad year for the middle class. And again, if you look at Marxism, what is it that they focus on? Marxism always works by the elitist telling the people who are poor that if you take things away from the people who have worked hard, taking it away from the middle class, that will lift them up. You look at what the original French revolutionaries did, right? They criticized Britain as a nation of shopkeepers, but that was really their strength. As Adam Smith pointed out, that was their strength, the fact that they were a nation of shopkeepers. They had a stake in what they were doing. They had an investment. They had invested their lives, they had ownership. Now when these people talk, what do you hear them say? Well, the stakeholders said this, the stakeholders said that. Who are the stakeholders? It's these invisible people who are running what is happening to us. We're not stakeholders anymore in their eyes. And so we need to understand that this system is rotting from the top down. And we need to rebuild this from the bottom up. We need to make our connections to each other, and we need to understand that we have to fight an asymmetric war, but that doesn't mean that this is going to be some kind of a violent war. If we do that, we will lose. When you look at Washington and you look at the Revolutionary War, where were the places where they had the most success? It was when they fought unconventionally. Right? When they lined up at Concord and Lexington, they got slaughtered, right? But when the British were retreating, they shot at them from behind the stone walls and the trees. And it was a Pyrrhic victory for the British. And so you don't fight symmetrically. You don't fight the same way they do. How do we do this? We do this with autonomous cells that we call local communities. We do it by getting our businesses together. We do it by making connections with the local farmer. And we do it by making connections in terms of bartering. We have to create a parallel society and build this up from the ground up. There are some elected offices, and I've talked to Sheriff David Hathaway multiple times because I think he's a stellar example of how you can have someone at the local level. Sheriffs can make this much worse than the state health officials or the federal health officials do. If you have a good sheriff, however, they can stand in the gap, because it takes someone who is going to be the boots and the billy club of the person who's giving the orders to make it happen. And if you've got somebody there who not only answers to you in terms of an election, and right now they have not put the election corruption down to the extent that they're really rigging everything down to the lowest level in every jurisdiction, but that's going to come if we don't stop electronic voting. But right now, you still have some say in that. And if you've got somebody like Sheriff Hathaway, who grew up in the area, who has a connection, who is not thousands of miles away, not half a continent away, but somebody who grew up and has roots in that community, you have a better chance with somebody like that who's going to protect your freedom. So if we start to work at the local level, it's very difficult. When I talk about national and international news, I'm trying to give you an idea, an overview. And the people on the left have always understood that they would tell people, think globally, act locally. We need to understand what the global agenda is, but we need to act locally to counter it. And we need to do it in a way that occupies peace. We need to do it in a way that is going to make connections with each other locally, so that we see each other as human beings and not as some figures on a Zoom meeting. They're trying to atomize each and every one of us, and we have to fight back against that by making a community. That's the way we fight these people. That's the way we become an autonomous, asymmetric war against them. All these different individual cells, they want to channel each and every one of us into the areas that they completely and totally control. Getting rid of local businesses, cutting off our ability to have upward mobility, cutting off those lower rungs of the ladder, making sure we don't have a job they will pacify us. You know, when we had Bloomberg running for president, one of the things that got people so angry about him were the comments that he made about the farmers. And yes, it was incredibly arrogant and elitist, as you would expect. But they missed what he was really saying. Yeah, he dished on the farmers. And a lot of people came back and said, farmers, they're very smart. They've got a lot of technology. And all that was true. But that wasn't the point. He said, farmers, we used to have everybody be farmers. We don't need that many farmers. And then we got people, and we can replace them easily. Anybody can do that job, he said. Well, we'll see. We'll find out soon enough. Because these people are making it very, very complicated to deliver food because they're breaking our supply lines with their mandates. But he dissed the farmers, and then he said, and then we had people working in the factories, but you know, we can replace them. What he was talking about was an agrarian society that was replaced with an industrialized society. And then he goes on to say, but the smart ones of us, like me, we're working on ways to replace everybody's jobs. And we just have to figure out how we're going to keep them from getting so angry that they come after us with guillotines. And what he was talking about was universal basic income. That was the entire text of what he was saying. And everybody focused on what he was saying. Oh, well, he dissed the farmers, then he dissed the industrial workers. No, what he was giving you was their strategy. This has been a long time in the running. Everybody knows about the Great Reset now. But this has been there for a long time. Agenda 21, sometime in the 21st century, the UN agenda was to make sure that we were all going to be packed into cities, that we're going to be completely dependent upon them. You had Davos be a little bit more explicit about it, putting out videos saying, well, you will own nothing, you'll go nowhere, you'll eat no meat, and on and on. That's their agenda. But you had around 2015, when they produced that video at Davos talking about their vision for the future, a utopia for the elitists, but a dystopia for the rest of us, a technocratic dystopia. When they started talking about that around 2015, it no longer was sometime in the 21st century. Then they put a date on it. Because these people, for whatever else they may be, They are very accomplished. And as we all know, as we all tell our children, if you've got a goal but you don't set a date on it, it's nothing other than just a wish list. So the date that they've set on this is 2030. Around 2015, they started talking about the Smart City Agenda, 2030. They started talking about the Great Reset, 2030. The UN changed the name of UN Agenda 21 to the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainability. It was always about protecting us from climate catastrophe. We should remember what H.L. Mencken said in the 1930s. He said the practical purpose of politics, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he said the practical purpose of politics is to create a constant state of alarm so that people will come running to the politicians to save them from these imaginary hobgoblins. And so we had imaginary hobgoblins that were going to destroy the world. First, as Earth Day began in 1970, it was going to be an ice age, right? Remember that? For about 8 years. Then all of a sudden they flipped the script 180 degrees and it was going to be global warming. They ran with that for quite a while. Then when their projections did not pan out, they changed it to climate change. And then when that didn't work out, they just replaced the DNA of the alarm with a virus. But the details always remain the same. It didn't matter if it's going to be an ice age or if the polar caps are going to melt or if it was a virus. It was always the same solution. And that should give us all a clue as to what the purpose of this is. That is their strategy. Their goal is to enslave us. Their tactics are fear. Primarily fear, pushed through propaganda. And so we have to push back. And we have to, as we look back at the Revolutionary War, what did they have prior to that? They had committees of correspondence. They had ways that they could organize collectively. We need to start organizing outside of their control structures. We need to not allow them to continue to funnel us into their control structures. That is the most important. And I'll say, thank you, I'll say one more thing too about totalitarianism. Understand that totalitarianism is not just authoritarianism in every aspect of your life. Totalitarianism demands control over your mind. That's why Orwell said, and had his character, the key goal that they had was to get him to say 2 + 2 = 5, and to truly believe it. That's why Solzhenitsyn said, you must not live by lies. He said they want to make us accept what we know is not true. And he said, even if you were coerced into this, even if you have a situation where you know if I don't toe the party line, I'm not going to have a job, I won't have a place to live, maybe nothing to eat, because they control everything. And again, that's where these people want to go. George Gilder has called the technocrats in Silicon Valley neo-Marxists. Why are they neo-Marxists? Well, because Marx and Engels believed with the Industrial Revolution that we had no shortage of any material goods, that it was simply a matter of redistributing all this equitably. And that's what these people are telling everyone. Because we have now technology and we have genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, with all that stuff, we can create unlimited amounts of material wealth, and it's just in how we're going to distribute it. We'll be the ones who will distribute this, and we'll decide how it's going to be distributed. And you know who's going to get it all, right? The people who are distributing it. They've already seen that with all the socialist countries. But George Gilder calls them neo-Marxists because they have that same idea. It's just now they believe that because of the information revolution that they're going to be able to do this. Always, just as Bloomberg was saying, they had set the goal of 2030. In South Korea, they were saying that by 2030, they're going to have massive unemployment, because they've got self-driving trucks. You're not going to need so many people driving trucks. The transportation industry is going to see 50%, 60% unemployment. They said, even in South Korea, they said 70% of doctors and lawyers. Understand that this revolution, global as it is also across all industries, and it is from the top to the bottom. This is not just about people who have entry-level positions. This is about everybody. We're talking about doctors and lawyers, 70% of them being replaced by artificial intelligence. And so they had always intended to do this, but now this allows them to blame it on the virus. And they don't have to worry about us coming after them with the guillotines, because it's the virus that did it. They're just there to save us with the universal basic income. We have to understand, I think there's going to be a couple of things that are going to save us. Again, it's the local connection that we're going to have. But I think when we look at the desire of the totalitarians to control our minds and our thoughts, that is one of the reasons why they've always come for the church. Taking the churches, taking the buildings, turning them into museums, that was a key part of the Russian Revolution. And when you look at what is happening now, I interviewed, the first pastor arrested in Canada was James Coates. They had been meeting since, I think it was last July. They'd started meeting. They started meeting after the large church in LA, pastored by John MacArthur, started meeting on a regular basis. 7,000 people there in one of the places where there were the most lockdown restrictions in Los Angeles. Meeting on a regular basis. It just kind of picked up organically. People started coming. They were holding distance church, and people started coming. They realized by July, of course, that there really wasn't a pandemic that they need to be concerned about. It was just simply, well, what are we going to do about it? Because the politicians are not acknowledging the fact that there's not really a pandemic. So it started building. And so 7,000 to 8,000 people every week, not doing social distancing, most of them not wearing masks. And the key thing that kicked it off was when the government went to the next step and said, all right, you can have a little bit of church, but you can't have as many people there, and you've all got to wear masks. Oh, and by the way, and you can't sing. And it's like, okay, now we know what this is about. We've got your number now. So they started meeting, and they've been fining them massive amounts of money, but that's been held in escrow. They did not want to have the optics in Los Angeles of arresting a pastor who was very well known. I mean, he used to be on Larry King frequently. And he's in his early 80s. They did not want to have those kinds of optics, so they left him alone and they allowed that to escrow. Some of the pastors in Canada started doing the same thing, and I've interviewed a lot of people at the very beginning of this pandemic. I said, the way we're going to get out of this is with the churches. And so I started interviewing pastors who were standing up in Illinois and other places. One pastor in particular in a small town, even though the Democrat governor of Illinois, Pritzker, wanted to lock down as hard as anybody else did. He was in a small town, and guess what? The sheriff was a member of the church. And so the sheriff was there when they were holding their meetings, but he says he wasn't there to arrest us. He was there to protect us from any state police that would come. That's the way you fight back on this. And so, yeah, exactly. Local community, sheriffs, people who understand what is going on, people who are watching each other, who treat each other as human beings, not as widgets to be manipulated. So in Canada, you had James Coates, and they were holding service for many, many months, weekly. Nobody got sick, nobody died, and nobody has gotten sick or died in LA. I just saw yesterday on the Drudge Report, the Washington Post has now said, look at this, they had an experiment in Barcelona, Spain, where they had a concert and they had 5,000 people show up, and the medical officials kept tabs on everybody and nobody got sick. Well, I reported on that quite some time ago, but now they're telling everybody, hey, look at this, 5,000 people. You've got churches where you got more people than that, meeting on a regular basis since July, and I said at the time, this is a controlled experiment, so use the data from it, learn something from it. But they know, and we know that they know. And we know that this is a fraud because of that. But when you look at what happened in Canada, James Coates arrested, he was kept in solitary confinement for 2 weeks. He was let out 15 minutes a day. They justified that by saying, oh, we got to keep you isolated for COVID. But he was arrested for holding church in spite of orders that told him he couldn't from health officials. They were not laws, they were orders from a health official. They have a charter in Canada that is like our Constitution. But of course, one of the other pastors that I interviewed, Artur Pawlowski, many of you remember him, get out, you Nazis, right? As he was telling everybody. That guy has an amazing life story. He grew up in Poland. His family escaped from communist Poland. They lived in Greece. And he was a very successful businessman there. He was recruited to go to Canada. After he went to Canada, He became a Christian, became a pastor. He was working on the streets, helping homeless people, doing street preaching. And he was a hero, getting all kinds of awards until one day he had some LGBT people come up, and they were very angry about what he was preaching. And they said, we're going to take you out. And from that point, he has been given one fine after the other. But he was not going to kowtow to what the government said. He was going to continue to hold church. They arrested him as well. I interviewed the third pastor. I've not interviewed him, but I interviewed his lawyer, who's with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms in Canada. And he came on and talked to me when he was having, it was recess, court recess, when they were trying to get Tim Stevens bailed out. Now, when you look at what is happening with these pastors, why are they coming after them? Certainly, the optics are bad for them, just like it would be with John MacArthur. But they're coming after them because by living their lives, by occupying their life, by occupying their space, by going to church, they're showing that this whole thing is a fraud. They're showing that the emperor has no clothes, and they can't handle that. These people are not directly confronting them. They're simply living their lives and doing what they are compelled to do, to honor their God. And that's what they cannot stand. They cannot stand people who are showing that they're frauds, and they cannot allow anybody to have control over what they believe. That's why they're coming for the churches, and that's why the churches are going to be the key in resistance. Think about this. If you've got a small business, you've got a lot of small businessmen, and you've had, it was upstate New York. I can't recall the guy's name, but you remember he was, they had several businessmen. They met at a gym, and as they were meeting, the police came in, and they said, we're not open for business, number one. Number two, we don't have more people than we're allowed to have in a building at one time. And where is your search warrant? Oh, you don't have one. Get off of our private property. Remember that? Yeah, that guy's a hero. Not only that, then they came back and they said, $15,000 fine. And he was being interviewed by Fox News, and he got up in front of the camera and he ripped the fine to pieces on camera, right? But then what happened to him? Do you know the rest of the story? Okay, what happened was they were going to come after him for $15,000 fine, but the guy who was a local comptroller who would collect the fine said, I'll give you 100 years to pay it. This is what I mean. This is how we have each other's backs at the local level. There's any number of ways that we can nullify tyranny. And we're talking about the churches. Understand how we got habeas corpus. Understand how we got jury nullification. It was one case, the trial of William Penn. Now, they had passed a law. It was a legitimate law, unlike these dictates from these public health officials. It was a legitimate law, said that you will only have church services for the Church of England, the official church. William Penn and the Quakers continued to meet. And so they told him, no, you can't meet. They locked the church building door. So William Penn and his church met on the church steps. At that point, they arrested William Penn. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. Is that what happened to James Coates? Right? They arrested him, and then they came back while he was, and one weekend they put up, you remember, they put up 3 layers of walls around that church building so they can't get in there. They're still meeting, by the way. And they're still putting their church meetings out, streaming them on the internet somewhere. But they're meeting clandestinely. Nevertheless, going back to William Penn, they arrested William Penn. He'd clearly violated the law, but the jury refused to convict him. And they took the jury foreman, William Bushnell, and the co-foreman, and the judge was so angry that they let him go. They said, we don't agree with the law, Judge. You know, yeah, that's the law. Yeah, they broke the law, but we don't agree with that law. And he said, you're going to jail in his place. And so he threw the 2 of them in jail. And they were there for quite some time. They finally got a lawyer to appeal the case and say, show us the law, habeas corpus. Show us the law that says that these jurors cannot nullify law. And he said, well, there isn't. So he had to let him go. That case, right, exactly. That case, a William Penn, who later founded, of course, Pennsylvania, William Penn stood up to that. And he did not intend to establish legal precedents that were going to protect our freedoms for generations, for centuries. But he did. He was simply trying to obey God, simply trying to live his life to occupy peace. And that's what is going to change this. When you look at the business owners, yes, you have courageous business owners like that guy who had the gym in upstate New York. But most business owners are going to take a cost-benefit analysis. And they're going to take a look at this. And they're going to say, well, what do I do about this? Most of the people who are going to be doing the enforcing of this are going to do a cost-benefit analysis. And they're going to say, well, I've got a career if I do what they tell me to do, right? And even people who don't want to do what they're demanding you do, they'll look at it and say, well, if I do this, I can travel. If I take the vaccine, I can go to school. If I take the vaccine, I can keep my job. If I do whatever they're demanding today, then I can have fill in the blank. Guess what? What have we seen this last year? When you do what they say, they add more. That's right. It'll never end. They're always going to add more. So when people do a cost-benefit analysis and you look at this, this is how they get people to follow along. But I'm telling you that when it comes to genuine Christians, they're not doing a cost-benefit analysis. That's right. That's where we're going to have the backbone to stand up. These people are going to do things that don't make any sense from a cost-benefit analysis. Why? Because they understand they're not stoic superhumans, okay? There isn't anything that has essentially turned them into crusaders. Like William Penn, they're not out there trying to establish new precedents or stand on principle. They simply know God, and they want other people to know God. They're not trying to fill out a lot. They're not trying to become self-righteous and say, well, I have to do this, this, and this to be approved by God. They know if they've got a relationship with God that Jesus Christ has taken all of their sins. And he has given them his righteousness, and they don't need to fulfill that. They just want to share that with other people. And those types of people who have integrity, this is going to be, and this is the good point about this. We look at this last year, and you look at so many of the things that have been taken away from us. And it's an opportunity for us to see what is real and what is phony. We can see the real churches and we can see the phony churches. We can see the real people who are telling you the truth, and we can see the people who are gaming you. We can see the real politicians, and we can the people who are going to stand and have your back at the local level. And that's what we have seen this last year. We've had a lot of parents who've gotten a view with these Zoom schools to see what's really being taught to their kids in school. And so that has put the fire under a lot of them to understand and to give them an opportunity that they can actually take control of their children's lives. This isn't some kind of magic thing that they have to turn over to an institution. You can't, let me tell you, you can't do a worse job than the schools do in terms of educating your children. So don't be afraid of that. Be afraid of having children who are alienated to you, who despise everything that you stand for, who have been completely turned into what we see on the streets of Portland, right? That's what you should be afraid of. So this is an opportunity for us to have a purging, to have a rebuilding of our society, and we should embrace the positive aspects of this. And we need to, all of us, occupy our lives and occupy peace. And thank you, Gerald, for doing this for so many years. Thank you.
David Knight. David Knight. Amen and amen. He said it. It's about the God you believe in. You name it. He said it's about the church. And we have the universal church of freedom, peace, and just us. And that's who we are. And we unite whatever God, whatever religion you believe in. If your God believes in freedom, peace, and justice, we are united and we could defeat them. From a guy that's been there, and you've heard me say this, I was the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate at 26 years old. I ran major political campaigns in Westchester County, on and on. These are gutless little people. We could beat them easily. And I also want to say, in the religion you believe in, where they tell you, you know, you want to go to heaven. After living a crappy life, you want to go to heaven? How about making heaven now? And that's the universal church of freedom, peace, and just us. We're going to live in heaven, and look at the heaven we're living in now. Look at the wonderful people here. Look how everybody respects each other. Look how everybody here is for each other and for yourself. No one telling you what to do, how to do it, when to do it. And as David said, all education is brainwashing. From a little kid on and on and on, and you see the masses that are brainwashed. And another thing, we have to unite because they're going to come out. They're already doing it. Big announcement yesterday in Denmark. They got that COVID passport. And they're going to keep doing what 375 colleges. You can't go to college without a vaccination.
Thank you for making the trip.
So we can unite and we can make this happen. So again, please, there are donations, the places over there on the corner over and near the building, and please go over there and put your address in, your email, so we can all stay in contact. And then the big news is we got Smokey Hormel and his Men of Renown. Man, what a band these cats are. The best of the best, along with BB and her gang. Everybody's here for a great time, so keep that spirit alive. Keep it going. Thank you so much for coming all this distance. You warm my heart. Thank you so much.